In everything that you learned about influence, would you say there is a generational difference in relation to the term influence?
I would say yes and no.
Okay.
I mean, there's no doubt that the generation you grew up in had influence on you in the way that you think and the way that you're kind of, the way that you initially think about things and the way that you naturally approach things. But I think there's the real danger of stereotyping as well, and everybody has their own personality and their own way of dealing with things based on their parents and based on, what they've been exposed to and based on their just innate personality. Like we can talk about all those personality profiles that we've done in different companies that we worked for and with Versato, and it definitely kind of makes you think more deeply about people and where they come from. But you also realize it's not based on how old they are. It's not based on anything they've done necessarily. It's based on genetics. It's based on a million different things. And so I think there's a real danger in stereotyping anyone. You have to really get to know them.
There's that whole like nature versus nurture type of thing. And I think that's exactly how I think of it too. Like the short answer is yes and no, but is it a generational thing or is it more of the idea that it's easier to group people in generations because of the influence of like nature around them at that time and what we as a society knew. Like it's probably more of that than the idea that, Gen Zs versus baby boomers are just different people because of the year they were born or something like that.
So, I mean, people debate all the time, like what's a millennial? What age group is that anyway?
Right. Yeah.
So you can't really put people into pockets like that.
Totally. And I think it's not funny, but I think it's interesting you talk about like disc profiles or personality profiles. And I always try and ground myself in thinking about those, that it's not that if somebody is characterized as, if we're thinking disc, if you are a strong D category, it doesn't mean that that's all you are. It just means your like natural energy state lies there. And I think the idea that influence, as we talk about being an energy, that makes a ton of sense. So like who you are, probably more in your personality profile, then gives you that basal foundation of like
your natural inclination to be a certain way,
and a natural inclination of how you'd influence. And there's probably a ton of parallels between those traits and then the generational gap, because of course so much of it is built on energy and outside influence. Again, to use the word in the definition, that a millennial is experiencing a whole different influence of society and life and how they think about how they want to translate that, just as a baby boomer would be looking at it differently. So
yeah, and I wonder, I speak as I guess I'm Gen X. I'm on the tail end of Gen X. I'm like the oldest end of Gen X. And I think that when you're younger, maybe your natural inclination is more apparent because you haven't developed the skills yet to kind of get beyond that or to evolve beyond that.
Yeah.
But when you get older and you've just experienced a lot more, hopefully you're not so defined or you're not so recognizable as your natural inclination.
Totally.
I like to think I take exception, all of to my disc profile. So I'm a little defensive about it. But I do think that with time, as you age and as you get experience, you kind of become better able to live in any of those kind of definitions of personality.
I agree. I also think it's interesting too, as you were talking, I was reflecting on the idea of like where you fall generationally, where I fall. And we have this like stereotype of like the wise old man or woman, so like, as they get older, we think of them as so influential, yet they don't speak nearly as much as a younger generation, which is probably makes a ton of sense in this podcast as well, where 90% of it is just going to be me talking for no reason whatsoever. But one of my uncles, who is somebody I consider a huge influence on my life, he doesn't say a ton. It's just when he does lend his influence, he's learned exactly that, how to compartmentalize and really read and understand and build an argument without having to say anything. And I think,
I think there's definitely something to that. I mean, my dad has always been that way as well. Probably since he was a teenager, he's always been that way. My mom, on the other hand, Brooklyn, New York, very temperamental.
Is she opinionated?
Oh my gosh. But I can tell you, over time, she's learned how to listen better and how to, react better. It's just, I do agree with that wholeheartedly, that over time, not all of us evolve well that way, but
those of us that make it many of us later in life, hopefully we pick that up along the way. Yeah.
So going kind of out of the theme of that, but talking specifically about our Versato team, you guys both just talked about your family a little bit. How do you think, because We
This really
have,
is turning into a therapy session.
well, I'm just recline on back. It's fine. Looking at our age span and all of the different generations that we have on our team, how do you think, or do you think that impacts the influence that we have on each other?
No, that's my first thought is I think we have great balance in a lot of things as a company. I sincerely mean that. We are actively hiring, but at the same time, this isn't a plug to get people to come here. No, but
www.versado.com.
You can find us on LinkedIn, upload your resume. No, I do think as a company, we do a great job of balancing each other's opinions and perspectives and keeping each other in check and recognizing that we're allowed to have our own opinion, but always rooted in some of the principles of just ego goes to the side. We're here to support the greater good while also maintaining personal balance and things. So generationally, though, it's interesting because I don't.
Most of our company is pretty young, so I can't say that there's a real spread.
See, I would argue like the other
Yeah.
way. I really would. I don't think our company's old by any means.
No, I would say we're very young.
Yeah.
Not we, not me.
I would say we have an interesting spread. If
I
you
do too.
really would if you would put us on a line and from the oldest to the youngest, we've got a nice spread, but that is not definitive of who's in leadership roles or who's
True.
not in leadership
That's a good
roles.
point.
And therefore assuming that those leadership roles are the influencers.
Well, that's what I can tag on to that. I think the way we see leadership is different
Yes.
than maybe some other companies where really what we're trying to do is use our influence in the most productive way and put people in the right places. So being in a leadership position doesn't mean that you're managing everyone. It just means that that's where your skill set really sits you well.
Yeah.
That's where you can contribute the most.
Yeah. So I think to answer your question is generations have nothing to do with influence in our company,
Yeah.
more or less. I think where I wouldn't have probably answered that way, but I guess it goes back to the idea, which I know we'll talk about later, like influencing without authority and not having to be in a seat of authority in order to provide influence. I think we as a company do that very well.
Agree.
And, at the risk of our CEO hearing this, I wouldn't say anything different.
No, but so that's amazing because that's exactly where I was going was I feel like Versado does such a good job of like that influence without authority. And so what do either of you have to say about that whole concept? How do you influence without authority? What did you learn about that and everything that you were researching?
Well, I can say the biggest point to make here is that it's not easy to do. There's so much to it, and it takes time, it takes energy, it takes attention to your audience way before you need to influence. So, it's building those strong relationships, like we'll talk a little bit more about. Making sure you really listen to someone, actively listen, summarize what they're saying, confirm what they're saying, and acknowledge like their positive intent. Like how many times have you been in a conversation where you're like, why did they say that? Like everybody that we work with and clients are like, have a goal and have a positive reason for doing what they're doing or want to be positive about what they're doing. They want to get to a positive solution. So recognizing that will help you get through some of the more tense conversations, I think. Just realizing that everybody has the end goal in mind, and they may not get there in the smoothest way, but acknowledge that that's where they want to go. And that'll really help you figure out how to continue the conversation and have influence over that conversation to get you all where you want to go.
I agree. And the part of like the underpinning of that too, which like, yes, and basically is we as a company, Versado, and other successful companies at doing this thing, I would argue, have a really strong value system. And they have identified what is kind of their shared moral background as like what we're here to deliver a service. We are a for-profit company. We understand there are deadlines, there's competing priorities. But at the end of the day, we are a company of human beings. And if we're going to operate effectively and do all those things to the fullest, there needs to be recognition of without a set of values that we all agree on, none of that can really flourish. Or it might have short-term success, but the longevity of our company is really jeopardized if we're not aligned on the idea that we need to support each other first and foremost and find and create opportunities for us to be our best selves, to speak honestly and have trust even when we are vastly different people, and that healthy recognition of that too. So yeah. Yes, and
Absolutely.
totally agreeing.
Well said.
Yay!
Next step, Spotify.
Yeah, there we go.